Any other guests who would like to ask a question is most welcome.
I would like to ask you two questions. My first question is, there seems to be constant struggle for freedom in Kashmir. What do you believe is the solution?
The question is about the freedom struggle in Kashmir. Now, I understand that here there would be many Indian guests as well, and if we turn this forum into a political forum, particularly in the areas of such as Kashmir, where the struggle is going on, then many other areas of the world would also require attention. And the purpose of this meeting, this session, will be in fact undermined, because we are holding such sessions to unite the world, to bring them together. So if we indulge in such questions which are controversial, there are two sides to it, then there is a danger of bad blood flowing between guests and guests. So I should like to avoid the answer confronting the issue as such. But in principle, I can only say that peace is entirely dependent on justice. Wherever there is a threat to peace or peace has been broken, there always is an unjust attitude as culprit behind that disturbance or disorder. So all the world politicians should pay attention to the question, the fundamental question of absolute justice. If somehow they agree as a whole that all human affairs must be settled on the principle of justice, then all the issues relating to peace and disturbances will be resolved automatically. So without attending to the basic cause of disorder, any answer will be meaningless. It may satisfy some, some may not agree with it, but no purpose will be solved no purpose will be served if I give a superficial answer. As I have already told you, everywhere the basic issue is that of injustice. So wherever we find injustice, we must have a common cause against it. Thank you.
It has been said that ghosts and spirits exist around people, and people have been said to have seen them and felt them. Is this true?
Have you ever seen yourself? Any ghost, any spirit are hovering around you?
No, not really.
Huh? I haven't seen either.
But it has been said.
So those who claim, let's ask them. Right?
Okay.
Ghosts and spirits, you said, right? But of course, one sometimes experiences something like phantoms. What they truly mean, we do not understand. And if they carry a message, then that they might represent a sort of vision from God. If they are without message, they just scare you, then they could be understood as a psychic phenomenon. Some inward disturbance is taking shape of these illusions. Right? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Huzur, there are some questions which a lady who's present here has passed on, and a lady who's present here, she has written these questions, but she doesn't want to appear herself. Right. There are a lot of questions she has. It starts with, what are the differences between an Ahmadi and a Sunni apart from believing in the Mahdi?
Ahmadi and a Sunni Muslim.
Ji.
Not Ahmadi and Shia Muslims. right?
No, she has asked about Sunni.
Okay. You see, the major differences, I should say, are quite a few. And it will take a long time to answer this question fully. And maybe it deprives others of their chances of asking questions. I will try to be brief without giving arguments on either side. Right? First of all, it's difficult to answer on behalf of all the Sunnis because they are subdivided into 34 sects. So how can I undertake the exercise of representing the different beliefs of 34 sects and then compare them to ours? So let us stick only to those of the Sunni beliefs which I find common among them and compare them with Ahmadiyya beliefs. First of all, we believe as a whole, as Ahmadiyya community, that Islam does not present a God who has ceased to speak to human beings or who will ever cease to speak to human beings at any cross-section of human history. So if he spoke in the past, he would continue to speak in the future and present inclusive, if and when he so desires. So unfortunately, the present day Sunni Muslims have adopted an attitude towards wahi, ilham, etc., which is very negative in nature. This has not been the view of the Sunnis throughout the history of 1400 years of the past up to Hazrat Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Many scholars as well as divine holy people among them have claimed to be recipient of Allah's revelations in some form. But unfortunately, I'm talking of the contemporary Sunnis. They seem to have lost hope in revelation. And this is what is emphasized in Ahmadiyyat. We believe that the essence of all religion is to lead to God, just not in theory, but practically to make man capable of being in communion with God, or capable of achieving such good conduct that God, if he chooses, may communicate with him. That is a better expression. So that's one big difference. And as such, the emphasis on prayer also is very much reduced and weakened among the other Sunnis. The prayer seems to be just a formal expression of raising hands and dropping them, while in Ahmadiyyat, the institution of prayer is taken very seriously. And all the Ahmadis over the world experience the benefit of prayer in the form of its acceptance, and also again in the form of messages from God, through dreams sometimes, through visions, also through revelations. So that is another thing which distinguishes Ahmadiyyat prominently as against the other Sunni sects. Again, they believe in the Jesus Christ not to have been crucified at all. This is their belief. They believe that the thing which was crucified, they believe, of course, that something happened, some person or somebody looking like Christ was crucified. So what they say is that that thing which was crucified was in fact a Jew. And he was completely transformed at the bidding of God by two angels who descended, got hold of a Jew who was, previous to that, was a sworn enemy of Jesus Christ. So he transformed his figure so perfectly that it was impossible even for the disciples of Jesus Christ to recognize him to be any person other than Jesus. And what they did, according to their story or belief, that these angels descended from heaven, opened up a big enough hole to carry this fake Jesus into the room where Jesus, they say, was kept before the day when he was to be executed, and took Jesus in their lap and decamped with him to the fourth heaven, leaving behind a person who looked like Jesus, spoke like Jesus, and even he was so dazed by the influence of these angels that he claimed to be the Jesus himself. So that something was crucified while Jesus was saved. And we believe that this is all not only a fiction, a myth, but the most nonsensical fiction and myth that we ever come across. God doesn't behave like this. If God wanted to save Jesus, he had other means. He has been saving other prophets before him. And for him to go into this drama, which would in fact work against the claim of Jesus, is the most stupid thing one can hear. How it goes against the interest of Jesus in Christianity is simply the fact that why God wanted to, according to them, their own admission, save Jesus was to save him from the accursed death, which according to the Old Testament, if someone claimed to be from God and he was not God, he was a false man, he would hang by the tree and he would die by the tree, by that hanging, and that would be a cursed death, proving that he is false. To avoid this drama was staged by God according to the other Sunni ulama. Now let's re-examine the case once again, re-examine the case, and you'll be surprised to see that it works exactly to the contrary purpose. It doesn't help Jesus Christ at all, because the Jews who were watching him, who were putting to test his truth by attempting to have him crucified, what they saw, according to this story, they saw somebody exactly like Jesus, who continued to claim to be Jesus. He believed in his identity as Jesus so strongly that he faced death rather than to change his claim, that rather to reform himself and say, all right, I withdraw my claim and I'm no longer the person I claim to be. Nothing of this happened. So what was the impression received by the onlookers, by the Jews who were watching with interest the outcome of this exercise? How could God blame them for rejecting him then? Were they not right? And within their religious right to disbelieve and reject him, because according to the Bible, if somebody claimed to be a prophet of God while he was not a prophet of God, and he hanged to his death upon the cross, then that person was a false man, he was a liar, and he had to be rejected. So what was the crime of those Jews who saw a figure like Jesus, claiming to be Jesus, until, as they say, his death, and accepted the verdict of Bible, of the Old Testament, and said he must have been a false person? Now, the ulama, the Muslim Sunni ulama say, when they appear before God on the Day of Judgment, God would tell them that you were duped, you were false, you were deceived. That was Jesus. That was not Jesus. It was a Jew. Now, what sort of God that would be, who would blame them for being duped by him himself, the Almighty, to such perfection that they had not the slightest chance of recognizing the man as not being Jesus. So this is not only illogical, this is an insult to the wisdom of God. And then what happened later on, according to them? The person who seemed to have died upon cross was approached by his disciples, his own mother. Not his mother, but Jesus' mother. While the corpse, they say, whom they were kissing and touching and seeking blessing from and shedding their tears over, was not the corpse of Jesus, but the corpse of a Jew. Well, I have full respect for Jews, but these ulama don't have any. So according to their scenario, this person was the sworn enemy of Jesus, whom his mother Mary was sending off like this with tears and with prayers and with such sorrow in her heart. So who was duped? The disciples of Jesus Christ. In reality, what happened was that such a drama could not have been conceived by anyone but the Satan and the devil himself, because it worked exactly against the interests of Jesus Christ and his followers. There's more to it. I have discussed it in detail in one of my small books on Jesus Christ and what happened to him. So I think this is sufficient for the time being. I'm sorry, I had promised perhaps that I will not go into the arguments, did I? But I was carried away. So this is their belief, and Ahmadis believe no such nonsense. What we believe is that God promised to save him from the ignoble death upon cross, as God had shown him in so many ways that he will be saved prior to crucifixion. He was told by God that he will leave the people here, the Israelite tribes to whom he addressed as a prophet, and go in search of the lost sheep of the house of Israel. This promise he had made to his people. So if he had died upon cross, he would be proved false, doubly false. First, because of the prophecy in the Bible that the true prophets will not meet their death hanging upon cross. And secondly, he had made a promise to his people, and that promise proved to be false. And secondly, he made another promise that no miracle will be shown unto the people of that time except the miracle of Jonah, the prophet of the fish. Now, what was that miracle? Did he die within the belly of the fish and was revived from that death? Or did he continue to survive within the period of 3 days and nights, as it is said, and came out live and whole as he was before being swallowed by the fish? So if Jesus is true, then this is what we should expect. That he goes through very dangerous and almost fatal crisis of his life, and God, according to his promise, saved him from death like he had saved earlier a prophet, Jonah, as known as the Jonah of the fish. So on both these counts, we believe that he could not have died upon cross, but he could have gone through a stage or a state looking like death, like deep coma. And he must have been revived from that, because this is exactly what happened to Prophet Jonah. When he was vomited ultimately, it is mentioned in the Holy Quran very clearly, and I understand also in the Bible, that he was almost on the verge of death. And God's so managed that he was vomited out in a place where there was some healing herbs who provided shadow and also some juices for him to chew the herb and get cured. So something like that should have happened to Jesus Christ if he was true, and we believe he was true. So that is why we read in the New Testament that some ointment was applied to his wounds. After his body was taken down and was kept in the sepulchre during that period, an ointment which in fact had been prepared earlier by his disciples. So the dead bodies do not need any ointments. This also is a sure sign that he survived the ordeal and was delivered alive from the cross, not dead. So this is the second very important area of our difference. And the third is about the Mahdi. They believe that a Mahdi would appear in the end of the time, at the end of the time, who would be a bloody Mahdi. Bloody Mahdi in the sense not as an invective or abuse, but bloodthirsty Mahdi. Would take up his sword and kill right and left and destroy all the enemies of Islam and conquer the whole world as if single-handed, who then will be joined by Jesus Christ from the heaven, who would descend, and they both would put up a joint front against all the enemies of Islam, and they would work like the demons of fairy tales, because their breath would be so poisonous that as they breathe, they would breathe death to the enemy. And that breath will be carried far and wide like a poisonous gas. Now, these things are mentioned, not exactly as I'm telling you, this is their belief, but as parables or as a figure of speech by Hazrat Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Hazrat Masih Maud, the founder of the Ahmadiyya community, has interpreted them very rationally and logically, and it has presented a very different realistic picture of what was to happen at the time when these events would take place. So we follow that interpretation of Hazrat Masih Maud and reject such views as a Mahdi, demon-like thing would appear, or Jesus, whom we prove from the Bible as well as from the Holy Quran that he was not carried away anywhere but lived a normal life after he was saved from death upon crucifixion. He and Mahdi, we believe, are not two different persons, but they are simply two titles of the same reformer. So if Jesus never ascended to heaven, so he would never descend from heaven. That is to say, live and bodily. Otherwise, of course, he ascended to heaven in spirit, like all prophets of Allah did. So that is our belief as against theirs. And again, the life after death, the decree of God, they are differently understood by us. They believe that the life after death would be a carnal reincarnation, not here on earth, but in the afterworld. So people will be reincarnated into their own bodies. That is, the revival would take place not of the spiritual form, but actually as the people here die on earth, so they will be raised. And that is why you might have read in newspapers controversies regarding the donation of eyes or parts of the body. The ulama of this school strongly condemn this as un-Islamic and irreligious, and they warn the people that if you donate your eyes after death, you will be raised blind, because your eyes would have been transferred to some other person, and he would rise with whole healthy eyes, and you will rise only with your sockets. So this is their view of the hereafter. We believe that the body will not be revived. If you believe in the revival of the body, then there are other very serious problems attending this concept. For instance, many people die of an old age, highly advanced old age, with rheumatism and all that, and some dies in their bed, they can't move, some on the wheelchairs. So will they rise like this? What sort of survival that would be? They would much rather die again than to be revived with all the rheumatic problems and this and that, and advanced age. You see, their younger bodies would have died much earlier. So the question is, if they are to be raised as they die, then they must be raised in the form in which they die. So we believe that this is all a very naive understanding of the hereafter. We believe that the soul or the spirit, when it leaves the body, it leaves as an independent entity. And we believe in the evolution of life to that end and for that purpose, that animal spirits or consciousness has not acquired that quality of independent entity which is required for survival after death. So they die, and they die along with their ego and their awareness of their self. Nothing is left. But man has reached a stage of such highly evolved consciousness that it can survive by itself without being constantly imprisoned in carnal body. Now this belief in the survival of the soul previously was rejected by the scientists on the theory that soul by itself is at best is a package of energy. And a package of energy cannot survive by itself in a form. So it's not possible. Well, whatever is possible or not belonging to other dimensions, first of all, it is not for us to decide. Because if the dimension of the soul is different, then we are not in a position to give a verdict about its possibility of existence or otherwise. In our soul, as we experience now, while we live, we can't comprehend it. The orders come from where? Where is the decisive power? And what commands the body? The nerves are only carriers. The brain is only an apparatus. What is mind? This has been investigated by highly qualified scientists, and they are divided among themselves. Some very strongly believe that it is not the brain which is mind. It is something ethereal we cannot touch, we cannot reach, we cannot comprehend. But that ultimate decision-making authority is something which is everywhere and yet cannot be defined to be here or there. So apart from that, the physicists have now discovered the existence of soliton, which is a bundle of energy which can survive without the need of being embodied in matter. And work has already been advanced on this subject. When this discovery was made in America, the first reaction of the physicists was, well, this is exactly what the religious people used to say. After all, soul can exist. So I'm not telling you this as a layman. I'm telling you on the authority of those who know the subject and who have ultimately reached the conclusion that something like soul as claimed by the religious people is scientifically possible. So this is our view of the hereafter, that we live a life in the form of soul or spirit. And what would be the dimension of that spirit, how it would have a dimension in the forms of length and breadth, etc., that is not possible for us to judge. It's not within our means. But something like that can happen and should happen if we are to live again. Now, the authority for this, religious authority, again I'm entering the arguments. So let's stop here, please. These are some of the major differences about our concept. And then hell and heaven. Hell is also corporal according to them, carnal hell and carnal heaven and so on. And we interpret them as spiritual forms of existence after death.
So, Jazakallah.
Any other question? Or you are going to put the second question as well?
Should I?
Okay, no, it's up to you. If there is a lady here who wants to say a thing, I think you better give her preference. Huh?
Good evening. You talk about the physical body, body, but what about the real I, the higher self? Do you work, or, we're only a shell, the physical body is a shell. What about the true essence of our being, the higher self? Do you work with your higher self? You talk about receiving...
I'll come to that. I'm not talking of mystical terms.
No.
I'm talking of hard realities. All among us, all living beings, have a center of consciousness. Some are more developed, some are less developed. That is the separating line between death and life. The moment life was created, even in the form of the most rudimentary amoebas and things, they had a consciousness. They somehow knew what was good for them, what was bad for them. They reacted against certain things, they were drawn into other things. And they knew somehow they must survive, and they knew what would make them survive. The consciousness is very, very dull, agreed. But life is consciousness. What I'm saying is that this consciousness went through the long evolutionary period so that every higher form of life became more conscious and more aware, until the stage of man or Homo sapiens was reached. And this consciousness, which is found in all forms of life, then expanded beyond all proportions to the previous experiences. Animals can be conscious of themselves, their surroundings, what they see, but they cannot rationalize things. They cannot see beyond. They cannot conceive what universe is. They cannot even dream of thinking of life after death and so on. So all these areas of highly refined consciousness are created by God for the purpose of man. If man had not reached that stage of high refinement and vastness of his consciousness, he could not be conscious of God, and the purpose of the whole universe would come to naught.
So how do you believe we can expand our consciousness here on earth?
Yes, we continue with our realizations. Now, I was comparing previously Homo sapiens with other earlier, less developed forms of life. But this comparison also applies between human beings and human beings. There are those who reject God.
Yeah.
and their consciousness remains limited to all that is here, and their life has only the purpose to satiate themselves with whatever they live with and live for in this world. So because they do not have that expansion in their consciousness, which includes the existence of God, so they are deprived of those special values which have to be inculcated in the soul, so that after death it feels the nearness of God and familiarity and a sense of reward of getting closer to the beloved one. So they are sort of inward-looking things, like animals in that respect, which don't visualize things beyond them. But there are other areas of differences in consciousness between a highly educated person and a less educated person, an ignorant brute and a highly sensitive person and a highly refined person. So we live with an aura of our consciousness around us. So we are bigger by that aura or smaller in accordance with the diminution of that aura. So every man cannot be judged by the same yardstick in this area.
So do you believe every day that our consciousness expands through life's experience?
Right.
So how can you expand your consciousness to a greater degree within you so that maybe you can help other people? I mean, for yourself, what?
Yes, this is the answer to this is already provided in the Surah Fatiha, the first surah which we read in every namaz, in the first chapter of the Holy Quran, and elsewhere also in the Holy Quran. The Holy Quran educates us in the area of further refinements and further expansion. And it tells us that it can only happen if you genuinely and rightly know the names or attributes of God. And if you realize what God is, you can only realize it with the help of understanding His attributes. So when you understand His attributes and you know that you have sprung from Him, you have come from Him,
yeah,
to return to Him in the best form would require you to imitate Him in all His attributes that you understand. So in this way, for instance, the Holy Quran, in the surah which I was speaking of, tells us of God being Rabbul Alameen. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. All praise be to Allah, who is the provident of the entire universe. So if you expand the area of your providence beyond your family and close circle of friends, and not only be kind to other human beings, but also to the animals and the very existence itself, then you are truly imitating God. And by imitating God in just one attribute, imagine how much it expands you and expands your consciousness. So this is the way, this is not just a philosophy.
No.
It's a solid education, a scientific education as to how you should expand your consciousness and refine yourself.
Some religions or ways of life provide things like mantras, things where we can focus our mind so that we can actually rise above our lower self. Because a lot of us know what's right and wrong, but it's more difficult to put those into practice. So by perhaps repeating things...
See, it is there that religion of Islam, and all religions, I believe, differ from philosophies and mysticism. In philosophies and mysticism, you try to delve deeper into your own self and find out the truth within you. But there the problem is that it varies from person to person as to what truth they may discover. And people belong to different stages already, like some are coarse people, some are hard-hearted, some are soft. And there's so many variations in the degrees that you can't even count them. So if everybody can reach the truth with this instrument of delving deeper into oneself, they are not equipped properly and equally to do that. So the margin of error is so big that it's impossible to agree to with the experience of one in the light of a different appearance of another person. So that is why the Holy Quran speaks of God Himself, the only authority to enlighten man as to what he is. Otherwise, it will be just conjectures.
But even with God and the truth of God, people can only accept to the degree of their state of evolvement, if you want to call it that. And so maybe what my truth is today, the truth I can accept today, is different from your truth because of your...
But we're talking only of degrees here, not as
but isn't that
something which cannot be compromised with the other part of our understanding. I'll explain. I understand the problem you have presented. You see, I come back to the illustration of God being the Rabb. Now, I agree that every man cannot be of the same quality and capacity to act as the provident for others. And he may understand this word slightly differently, of course, or even with a big difference. He says, I am Rabb to my family and that's enough. Some say, no, he's Rabbul Alameen, so I must go beyond the family circles. But there will be no contradiction in them. Some will gain to a smaller degree, some will gain to a larger degree. So there is no danger of such errors as will deprive you of the purpose of this exercise. So that is why it is highly essential to know God from Him. Another reason why we are compelled to do so, we can't have another option, is that God is beyond human beings, beyond all understanding, including angels in all forms of life, because there is nothing like Him. So unless He reveals Himself, and only to the degree that He reveals Himself, we can have a measure of access to understanding Him.
But if we're all part of God, surely by looking within, we can reach those truths.
Part of God? God has no parts.
Okay, God is...
I mean, you visualize Him like a motor car with parts?
No, to me...
An aeroplane more complicated? Yeah?
No. I mean, okay, as I understand it, God, everybody... a lot of people talk about God in an image they can understand.
You have physical parts,
sure,
as I have.
Yeah.
But you don't have spiritual parts.
I don't.
Nobody.
Why?
I don't have either.
Why?
You don't have spiritual parts because spirit is indivisible.
It's indivisible.
It can have characteristics, but no parts.
Yeah.
You can't say this is the limb of the spirit, this is the arm, this is the elbow, and this is the neck of the spirit.
But spirit is energy, isn't it?
Physical beings have parts, and the spiritual beings have aspects or characteristics, that's all.
But what about the soul within us, the spirit within us?
The soul, as the Bible also says, and the Holy Quran also expresses the same truth in different words, but to the same substance, that God has made man after Him. That means the characteristics of God, which man could understand, has already been provided in him to some degree. So if God is kind, so the potential of being kind has already been planted in man. If God can be vengeful to those who hurt the innocent people, for the sake of innocent people, sometimes a part of them should be punished as well. So when vengeance creates goodness,
Yeah.
only then God is vengeful, not otherwise. So that also is bred in man or human beings. So that is why I said spirit has no parts, but it has characters and attributes.
But surely the true essence of our being is spiritual.
Pardon?
Sorry,
Please,
I'm taking up. Isn't the true essence of our being spiritual? I mean, this physical
right.
body is only a shell which we need for the earth plane here.
Well, not shell in the sense that is filled with milk, something like that. The whole body is has constituents which run into billions. And each constituent of body in the form of cells of different types and natures are given different messages by God, and they have to act according to those messages, which nowadays the scientists call the DNA and RNA, character-bearing chromosomes and things. We believe that each body as a whole is not a shell but an apparatus from which soul is extracted and then governs it, and that soul has no parts. It's equally available to all, equally belonging to every part of the body, and yet you can't define this is soul and that is soul. It's invisible.
Yeah.
When it leaves the body, there is no decrease in the body weight at all. When a child is given life, it begins to breathe, there is no addition to its body weight. So it cannot be a mass. It has to belong to some dimensions which are incomprehensible to us, but its existence is beyond doubt. Because if we are what we think we are, the moment we think of ourselves, we prove the existence of soul.
Thank you. I won't take up any more of your time. Thank you.
Well, it's no fault of yours. The subject is very vast. Of course, I agree. Yes.